broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to just hold off for a few more minutes. I'm waiting for a couple more attendees to join. So I will put myself back on mute for just about 2 minutes or so, and then we'll get started. All right, thank you so much everyone for staying tuned. I just wanted to make sure that everyone that is planning to attend got a chance to dial in. It looks like we're almost have everyone on the line, so I think we should go ahead and just kick it off and get started. So again, thank you everyone for your time and for joining us today. Today's master class is all about automations in Service Cloud. We're going to talk about automations tool in Service Cloud. We're going to configure a few automations ourselves to walk you through how they're best set up. Before we get started, a brief introduction of who is here today. Myself, Suzanne Shahud, I'm a senior success specialist here at Salesforce. I work on the scale team, and most of my day-to-day work is to help our customers transition over from Desk.com to Service Cloud. So we try to assist with data migration, some setup to get them properly onboarded on the Salesforce platform. On the line, we also have my manager, Barbara Tassa. She will be helping out with questions throughout the session. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat box or in the questions panel if you think of anything as we go through the slides. And we will have enough time towards the end to get to everyone's questions. There will also be time for, we'll be able to unmute you guys if you would like to ask questions directly. So with that, since we're talking about some of the logistics, let's hop over to the next slide. You can ask the questions in the questions panel. You also have a chat box, whichever you prefer. I would recommend using the questions panel. That way, all of the organizers are able to see your questions and we can get to them sooner. You will also see in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a section called Handouts. If you click to open that handout section, you'll see a PDF file with all the slides and the deck from today's session. If you would like to grab that to follow along, you'll see that we don't have a lot of slides for today. We're going to focus on the demo session and the actual hands-on part of today's masterclass. But it's there for you if you would like to download it, if you want to follow along and take a closer look at those slides. All right, let us get started with the agenda for today. We are, again, trying to keep the agenda super focused on the demo part of this, but we will start off with an overview. So we'll talk a little bit about why automation is great to use and which automation tools are available for you in Service Cloud. Then we'll move over to an automation feature breakdown. So I'll basically show you and briefly showcase a comparison table to walk you through why the automation tools are different in terms of their functionality. Hopefully that will guide you to be able to much easier decide which automation tool is better in a certain situation. Then we'll move over to talk about some additional types of automation. I'll walk you through assignment rules and case auto response rules, what they are and how they can be used. Our main part of today's session is the demo part. So the slides, as I mentioned, are not that many, but we'll keep our focus on this section. We'll do some hands-on practice. We'll set up some various automation processes. Majority of these processes are simple and straightforward. I do have one little bit more complex process towards the end. If anyone is curious to know how you can use Process Builder, I save that as the very last automation. But the basics, we'll stick to basics today and try to walk through mainly what you would need to, in terms of sharing examples of what you would need to do to mimic your desk rules and some of your desk automation and setup. Finally, we have plenty of time for Q&A today. It's a long session today. We like to schedule these a little bit longer than our office hours. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that we can get to everyone's questions. If you are stuck on any rules yourself or you want any best practice advice, then we have sufficient time to get to everyone. We can unmute you. You can ask directly to everyone in the group or submit the questions, and I'll read the question and share it with everyone and then answer as much as I can. Now, before we start, I'm finally done with the agenda. I just want to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of how experienced today's group is and just gauge how much you know about automations and tools. So I'll go ahead and launch a tool right now. And just give me a quick response if you are completely new to this, if you have tested out automations before, or if you feel like you are already an expert, then today's session might be pretty basic, but I would still like to hear from everyone to see how you feel about rules in Salesforce overall today. Perfect. Thank you so much for dropping your votes. Wonderful. I have everyone's vote. And here are the results. It looks like a few are completely new to this. The majority have definitely tested with the rules, but nothing complex. So that is great to hear. And we have no automation experts on the call just yet. Who knows, this might change throughout the session. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. That gives me a better understanding of where everyone is at, and I'll try my best to cater the content towards your level of experience today. Okay, so that leads us to our very first slide, an overview of what you actually have to choose between. So the reasons why you would want to use automations, it's simply instead of having to rely on your agents and your users to perform specific parts of your business processes in a manual fashion, you would want to automate it. And the benefits are twofold. The first is pretty obvious. Your users can spend their time on other tasks and not have to complete manual processes and redo them over and over on a case-by-case basis. The second and obvious benefit is also that having an automated process gives you that trust that the process was in fact complete, because you know the rule was triggered or the process was triggered and the actions that the rule was intended to complete have been successfully done. And on the Salesforce platform, we do offer a variety of tools to try to automate different kinds of business processes. So we have everything from guided visual experiences to automations happening behind the scenes to approval automations. There's a lot of different tools that we can make use of. And you'll be happy to know that these tools do not require any code. They are all point and click. So they're mostly fairly straightforward and easy to set up. You'll get to see some of that during the demo part. There is no code needed, no triggers needed to complete regular basic support processes where you want an automation to happen. And as you can see on the list here on the slide at the bottom, there are multiple tools available to use that will certainly make your agents' lives much easier in the long run. We have workflow rules, process builder, flow builder, approval automations. And for today, I'm going to be demoing the first two, workflow rules and process builders, simply because we don't really need to get into overly complex scenarios at this time. Flow builders are mainly used for more complex scenarios with variables, and it's just at a level where we don't really need to demo that at this point. We might be scheduling something at a later time. And for approval automations, it has a very specific scenario that it's trying to meet. So when we think of desk customers having desk rules, inbound interaction rules, or case updater rules, or time rules, you can get a long way with just using workflow rules and process builder. So we will focus on those two. And before we start that section, let's take a quick look at what each of these tools are actually capable of. They are able to do different things. So the most common questions that we get is, how do you decide which automation tool is the best automation tool for the specific rule or process that you're looking to recreate? So this actually entirely just depends on the type of process you're looking to automate or rebuild. What do you need the process to do? Or what do you need the process to evaluate and review? And what type of actions would you like to complete when your automation triggers? So what is your end goal when the rule runs? What do you want to happen after that? So this table is just a brief summary. I've added the complete link below. So there is a longer table with a complete list of every single item that each tool is able to complete or is not able to complete. It's a very easy table to review, but I included the most important differences here for the type of actions that would be most relevant to our desk customers. And some of these are in terms of complexity. Workflow rules can make use of regular single if and then statements. So where you tell the rule, if status is pending, then update this field or do this task. Same thing with approvals. You can have a single if then statement. With Process Builder, you can have multiple if then statements that can be evaluated at the same time. So it's a step up in terms of complexity. Flow Builder being obviously, as you can see, the most complex, where you can do a whole lot more than comparing to regular workflow rules, for instance. Visual Designer means that the UI, when you build the rules, looks a little bit more different. It's mostly drag and drop. And that is supported in Process Builder and Flow Builder. If it's not drag and drop, then it's a different visual designer where you can very clearly see how you're stacking the actions on top of each other. Workflow rules are much simpler in terms of setup. Time-based actions mean if you are looking to trigger a rule where you want the action to happen a little bit later. So for example, you have a rule evaluating when a case is created, you want an email alert to be sent, but you want it to be sent an hour after the case was created, then you would need a time-based action. And that is supported in both workflow rules, Process Builder, and of course, Flow Builder. So you can accomplish with either workflows or process when you want to delay your actions. Which ones of these can create and delete records? The only one that can delete a record, so when a rule runs, the action would be delete record or delete specific parts of your maybe case or lead, is the flow builder. When it comes to creating a record, so you would have the rule evaluate a specific condition. Let's say if status equals closed, then create an order record or a lead or an opportunity. Only the process builder can accomplish this along with flow builder. Workflow rules can only create tasks. So tasks are not an actual object record. It's much simpler. So if you need a rule that would actually create a specific record because the rule ran, then you would want to use the process builder. And the final one is the very common scenario in Desk where you have a rule running, and when it triggers, it sends out an email alert or an email notification or an acknowledgement of some sort. Every single tool can basically accomplish that, but you can do a little bit more with that email alert that you're sending when using the flow builder. But if you're looking for regular, just a basic email notification of some sort, then you can accomplish that with either of the tools. All right, so I think that's enough covering the table. Again, if you need to see the full view of everything that these rules can accomplish and the differences, then the link is there. And you have the PDF in the handout section below, and we will share this later on after the session as well, so that you have access to all the links and all the material. All right, so now let's talk about some additional types of automation. In addition to the tools that we just talked about, there are some additional automations available to you that you can make use of in Service Cloud. Assignment rule is the first one. Assignment rules are generally used to automate how cases are processed when a case has been created. So the rule will, for instance, use a set of conditions or criteria to determine how a case is assigned, whether you want to assign it to a queue, a group, an agent, a team, where that case should be routed for case handling. You can control that by using an assignment rule. In Desk, this would be done by using an inbound interaction rule, where you would set up your rule conditions to perform a specific set of actions and decide who the new case owner is. And the setup is fairly similar in Service Cloud. I'll show you in a little bit how these are best set up. But it's essentially whenever you want to determine how that case is supposed to travel as soon as it has been created, who should take ownership of that case and work on it. One important note here is you can only have one assignment rule active at the same time or at once. So that means you can have multiple rules, but they would be deactivated. Only one version and one of those rules can be active. If you activate a second rule while having one rule already set to active, then it will deactivate the first one. So only one can be functioning at the same time. So the way you would use it due to this limitation, and this is actually per design, the way you would use an assignment rule is you would add multiple rule criteria to decide how a case should be processed and routed. So within that one same rule, you would say, first evaluate if the case was sent in to abc@support.com, then assign it to tier 1. Then you would have a secondary criteria. If status is new, assign it to tier 2, and etc. So you can stack those criteria and rule criteria and conditions on top of each other in that same one rule. And there's actually a limit of how many criteria you can add for a rule, but it's very high and it's set to 3,000 criteria. So you will likely never hit that limit. So that was assignment rules. Now, case auto-response rules are very similar. You would create an auto-response rule. In this case, it would most likely be on the case object. So you would want to create a case autoresponder rule to quickly send a response or an email to your own customers and end users and let them know that someone on your team has received their case, you acknowledge that the case was received, and you'll reach out to them soon for further assistance. So it's basically the equivalent of auto acknowledgements in Desk, where you would trigger, in desk, you would trigger it using an inbound interaction rule. You would say if the case is new, or if the case was sent in to a dedicated email address, then send my auto acknowledgement template. In Service Cloud, you would basically do the same thing, but they're just called different names. You would use a template instead of an auto acknowledgement rule, and you would trigger it with an auto response rule rather than an inbound interaction rule in desk. So again, it's very similar in terms of how these are built and set up. And as you can see, the last section there, the same applies here. You can have multiple autoresponders, but only one can be active at once. And it has the same limitation of a maximum of 3,000 rule criteria. So you are completely good to add as many criteria as you want in one rule only, and it will evaluate one criteria at a time and trigger accordingly. So we'll take a closer look at that now. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hop into my demo org or trial account, my little T shop. This is just a regular custom trial org. These are the same orgs that we provide our desk customers with. Whenever you sign up for one of our trials, you would have the same trial and same account set up. It's an enterprise edition org. And I would recommend, if you want to practice how to best set up these rules, then go ahead and hop into your own org, log into your own account, whether it's a sandbox or if you do have a trial org set up, then go ahead and log in. I think it would be easier to follow along that way. If you happen to have an active and existing environment only that is already being used live and it's in your only production environment, you can always follow along but without activating these rules. So you can create the rules and just leave them deactivated. That way the rules will not, they will not trigger and they will not do anything. All right, so let me exit out of here and we'll get back to the slide at a later time. And let me make this much bigger. All right. Just making sure that you can all see. Let me know in the chat box or the questions panel if this is large enough. You don't really need to see the details of the cases. We're mainly going to be in the setup menu, but if anything appears unclear, let me know and I'll zoom it in a little bit further. We are going to navigate to the setup page. And in this setup page, before I go ahead and start building anything, I do have my own demo desk side up and open here. So if you have a desk side available as well, feel free to hop in and review which type of rules you had in desk. It helps sometimes to see the equivalence of what you're building in Service Cloud of what you had in desk.com. So I'm hoping that this will help illustrate a little bit better how you can take your setup in desk.com and rebuild it into Service Cloud functionality. Before we go ahead and get started, let me see if I had some questions here coming in. I think, Barb, you are on top of those questions. Andre, we'll get back to you in a little bit. I saw your question. And let me just double check here. Perfect. All right.
Hey, Suzanne, I was just thinking that we can answer Andre's question when you actually get to show the workflow rule. So, Andre, if you want to hang on to that, Suzanne will get to that.
No problem. Let's do that. All right. So the very first rule that I wanted to build is a regular workflow. So the workflow rule, I'm going to mimic this desk rule called escalate important new cases. And if we open up this desk rule, what it does is it checks, it has an all condition, meaning this condition has to be true, while these any conditions may or may not be true while this all condition is true. So basically, if status is new on the case that is created, and any of these two any conditions are also true, then the rule would trigger. So in this scenario, in my rule here, I'm saying that if status equals new and the subject of the case that was created contains the word urgent, or the body of the case that was created contains the word urgent, or the body contains the word ASAP. If any of these, any conditions, so an any condition basically means they may or may not be true. All conditions means they must be true. So if my case that is created does not have status new, then this rule can never trigger. Even if the case has the word urgent in both the subject line and the body, or the word ASAP, if the any conditions evaluate to true, but my all condition does not, then the rule will fail. It will not trigger. So we will need to make sure that for any for any cases to trigger this rule, this first all condition must be evaluated to true. So we're going to rebuild this fairly simple rule here as a regular workflow rule. So to go ahead and get it started, I'm just going to copy my rule name here. Not because I'm lazy, but just to make sure that I don't forget any parts. And in my setup menu, I will navigate to workflow rules. So you can type workflow, it will pull it up in the menu here. I'm going to select workflow rules. Let me make that even a little bit larger. So when you enter the workflow rules section, there is some really good information at the top here that walks you through how workflow rules are intended to work. So I would highly recommend this if you haven't built any flows before. Have a read through. It will give you a good overview and understanding of what you can do with these workflow rules. Generally, what I say is in Desk, let me close this out briefly. Because we have so many different rule types in Desk, almost all of these rule types can be translated into just workflow rules. But because I want to showcase how assignment rules and autoresponders and processes also work, I will be showcasing those other tools. But if you're looking to keep things really simple, you could technically rebuild all your rules from Desk as workflow rules, with a few exceptions that we'll get into later. All right, so let's go back to that rule and open it up. So we have our conditions up here. So the first thing I will do here is hit the new rule button. And the first thing that the rule requires me to do is decide which object do I want to run my rule on. I want to run this on cases. Any case that is created should be evaluated by this rule to where it may or may not evaluate to true. So I'm going to select case. And the majority of your rules when building out Desk rules would be either case object or email message object. Very rarely will you need to decide to choose anything else. And we'll click next. So now we're at step 2 here where we need to configure the rule. So we need to give it the name that I copied. So I'm just going to paste that in. And if you would like to add a description to further just give yourself a description of what that rule does, you can go ahead and add that here. We get to the next section here, evaluation criteria. So what this means is we actually get a chance to determine how the rule should be evaluated. Do we want the rule to only be evaluated when a case is created, or when a case is created and every time it's edited, or created and any time it's edited subsequently to meet the criteria? I only want to trigger this when a rule is created. So this is supposed to escalate important new cases. So new cases are generally a case that just came into the queue and I want to escalate that. So I'm going to select created. I don't need to evaluate cases that are updated later on. If you keep scrolling down, this leads us to the rule criteria section. This rule criteria section is essentially equivalent to this condition section in Desk where you add your all condition and your any condition. So that is what we would do here. And you can essentially leave this upper part here as default. It just says run the rule if these criteria are met. So you can leave that as is and start selecting the fields that you want to review and evaluate. So the first thing we want to evaluate is case status equals new. So I will find my status field. I happen to have two there, but it's the first one. And you will say equals, and you would select from the list. I know it's very small, it might not show, but I'm selecting status new. So status equals new. And I'm just going to add them all in first, and then I'll get back to the fact that this is an all condition and the rest are any conditions. But I just want to add the rest first, and then I'll show you how you can differentiate this first condition from these three any conditions. So let's keep adding these. Subject contains urgent. So I will select case subject contains urgent. I also had body contains urgent and body contains ASAP. So for that, I need to scroll down to the email message section. And the reason I wanted to show this is in Desk, there was just something called case subject, case body. In Service Cloud, there's the email message, which represents the content within your case, as well as the case that represents, almost I would call it a shell that holds that email within it. So you would want to scroll down all the way to the email message fields, and you would select the body field. And here in Service Cloud, it's called HTML body. So you would select the email message HTML body field, and you would say the same thing, contains urgent. And the last thing was also the body field. So we'll go back all the way to email message, body field, contains, and then we have the word ASAP. So now we've added to this rule 4 different criteria that we would like this rule to evaluate. But there is one main difference. The first criteria has to be true. The 3 next criteria may or may not be true. These are any conditions. So we do have to add something called filter logic. And it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's logic to determine how these criteria should be evaluated. So by default, the rule will automatically create an and statement in between your criteria. So the way it reads now is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that means all of these 4 must be true. But because my desk rule had 1 only that had to be true and 3 that did not need to be true, but they can be true, all I need to do is change, the first one needs to be true, but the second and third and fourth, the other 3 need to be possibly true. So instead of the word and, you will swap that out for an or. So you will say 2 or 3 or 4. And we're going to add a parentheses here to put them all in a separate group. So the way it reads now, and I'm hoping it's not too small, let me know otherwise and I'll put it in the chat box. It basically just reads 1 and then you have 2 or 3 or 4. So the first one has to be true and 2 or 3 or 4 or any of the 3 other criteria. So that is how you would mimic that same behavior in Desk with any conditions and all conditions. That is all we need in the rule. So these are the criteria. I will scroll down and save that, and it will give you a summary of what the rule looks like so far. So at the top, it has your rule criteria, and it puts it all in one long line. So the way it reads is case status equals new, and subject contains urgent, or the email body message contains urgent, or the email message body section contains the word ASAP. So now you've built your criteria. The only part that's missing is this, your actions. What do we want to happen if those evaluate to true? My rule had 1 action only. I wanted to increase the priority to critical. So that's simple enough. So we'll go back to the rule and we'll tell the rule what to do if these evaluate to true. So this is where you give the rule that instruction of what should I do next. So we'll click Add Workflow Action. We want to create a new field update. So we want the field that we want to update is the priority field. We want it to increase priority to high. So we'll select New Field Update, and the page will update for you. And they want a name. This name represents what the action should do. So I will say increase priority so that I can easily see what my action actually does. Increase priority is my name. The field to update, I'll just select it from the list. So I'll scroll down and find the priority field. And it will automatically update for you and allow you to select a specific value. So all I did was select the field priority. And in this section, I will select high. So the field that I selected priority has 3 values, low, medium, and high. I will select high and save. And that basically concludes the rule. We added our criteria at the top, and the action that will be performed if these are true is to increase priority to high. And that is how you build a workflow rule. I'm hoping that wasn't too overwhelming, but I know that the majority of you have played around with the rules a little bit, so I'm hoping that was a good example on how to replicate one of those rules in Desk that has both any and all conditions and a very simple action to follow. If you have any questions, drop them in the questions panel or in the chat box. I'll get to all the questions at the end. Now, this next rule here is called Assign to Cupcake Support. So I will now build an assignment rule. An assignment rule, as we talked about earlier, is deciding and determining how the case should travel, how the case should be processed once it has been created. And as you can see, I have 2 rules that are similar here. One called Assign to Cupcake Support, one called Assign to Cupcake Support Added Condition. The reason I did this is because I want to showcase 2 different ways of replicating the same desk rule with 2 different tools in Service Cloud. The first one doesn't actually need any rules at all. We can accomplish this by simply configuring a few settings in Service Cloud. The second rule would need an actual assignment rule. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can accomplish this rule number 2 here without actually building a rule. So I'm going to go ahead and open it so you can see what it does. It's called Assign to Cupcake Support. And the only thing it does, and this is a very common desk rule, is it checks to see where the case was sent into. So what was the to address? What was the case sent into? Who was it addressed to? So the rule reads, if the email to address was cupcakes@support.com, or any other similar address, cupcakes at something. If this was the sending address that your end user sent into, then we want to set the case assigned group. So we want to assign the case to a group called Cupcake Support. So the assignment of this case should always go to the Cupcake team if the case was sent into that dedicated Cupcake address. If this is what your rule looks like in Desk, you can accomplish this without a rule. And I'll show you how that is done. If you go back to your main setup page, you will search for email to case. Email to case is your equivalent to mailboxes in Desk. So this is your email address that you may or may not have connected to Service Cloud. So this is what creates your cases. So we'll select email to case. We'll scroll down past all that text. And the only part that I'm interested in is the bottom part here. So this is where I have my routing address. So basically I have added one address here called Yummy Cupcakes of Brooklyn at gmail.com, a very long address. This is my email address that I've connected to Service Cloud. So this is my routing address. So if anyone emails into yummycupcakes at gmail.com here, then it would create a case in my service console. So what you would do, if you have created your mailbox already, you've already connected it to Service Cloud, you'll go ahead and click Edit to open up the details of this mailbox. And what Service Cloud allows you to do, it's a very neat functionality. It's located at the very bottom under this case setting section, is you actually have an area here called Case Owner. This case owner allows you to decide immediately which group your case should be assigned to. So let's say I hadn't selected anything here. By default, it will look like this. It defaults to a blank user. If you want to determine, similar to in this desk rule here, if any case comes to that specific dedicated address, I always want the assignment of that case to go to that specific group for cupcakes. Then you don't need a rule for this. You would simply configure your email to case by selecting in the case section, you select case owner, you'll select queue. A queue is a group similar to desk groups, and you will select your queue from here. So I already have a queue and a group called Cupcake Support. I will select it from here and save. And what that does is it will always default the ownership to Cupcake Support whenever anyone emails into that specific Cupcake address. So this is a great way to repurpose desk rules into actual settings and mere configurations in Service Cloud. So no rule is needed to accomplish that behavior. And you can, of course, have multiple email addresses and multiple mailboxes, and every mailbox has its own default case owner. Now, the reason why I had, yep.
Hey, Suzanne. Yeah, sorry, that was me. I was just saying we have a couple of questions from Brian and Nikolai. I'm not sure if this is a good time, but whenever you're ready, we can maybe take some questions and show them how to do things live.
Absolutely. Let me walk through this other scenario of the assignment, and then we'll get to the questions. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, fantastic.
So this second rule, the rule number 3 here, is basically a tweaked version of this rule that we just configured through settings. So it's called Assign to Cupcake Support Added Condition. The only difference is, in addition to the email address being evaluated, I'm also evaluating something else. So whenever you have a scenario where you need to check both the address it was sent into and a field or any other part of the case, then we can't make use of this email to case functionality. So this is only straight up if you have an incoming address coming in, you know you want to default it to a specific queue, then you can set that up here. But in this specific scenario, I need to evaluate both the incoming address and subject being a specific subject. So I'm checking if subject has the words new cupcake order and the email was sent into that address, then assign it to Cupcake Support. And for that, you would need an assignment rule. So we're going to create an assignment rule for this. We'll search for assign or assignment, and it will pull up the case assignment rule section. Case assignment rules, as we mentioned, you can only have one rule at a time. Right now I have no rules at all, so I will go ahead and click new. And I'll give it a name. So I'm going to copy this, assign to Cupcake Support. And while I'm here, I will check active. So I will go ahead and activate it right away. And it does give you information here to say that you can only have one rule active at the time. Now, adding the rule, all it does is creates the rule for me. It's completely blank right now. So I have to click to open up the rule. And as you can see, the rule does nothing. So my assignment rules, it has no criteria to evaluate. It is not able to assign anything out to anyone just yet. So to refresh everyone's memory, I wanted to evaluate both the incoming address and the subject. So to build the assignment rule, we're going to add our rule criteria or rule entries by clicking new. And before I add my criteria here, a quick note on step 1 here. Step 1 means what it says here is set the order in which the rule entry will be processed. It sounds really fancy. I wouldn't worry too much about this. The only thing you need to remember is that you need to set the sort order to a number, and you always start with number 1. So the default is just to add a number 1 here in the sort order to evaluate it in the order that it comes. So we're just going to add sort order 1, and now we're going to start stacking our criteria. So we wanted to say subject, case subject contains, and we wanted to check here, new cupcake order. So if the subject has the word new cupcake order and the email address was sent into the cupcake address, so you'll say, we're going to find those email message fields again to evaluate the email part of the case, and the email to address. So it has the same name. The email to address contains, and I'm going to use that long, yummy cupcakes of Brooklyn at gmail.com. So my assignment rule reads, if my subject has those words and that verbiage, and the case was also sent into that address, then we want something to happen. My filter logic, I don't need to change anything because by default, it adds 1 and 2. Both have to be true at the same time. So I will leave this as is. And scroll down to select what I want to happen if those 2 criteria are met. And what I wanted to assign the case to the group for the cupcake support team. So in my assignment rule, I will select Q because Q is equivalent to group, and I will find my cupcake support team. If you want to trigger an email template to notify your team, you can do that as well. I'm going to leave that as blank. All I want is to change the assignment of the case to the cupcake support team and then save. So that is how you build an assignment rule. As you can see, it looks very similar to workflow rules where you're stacking your criteria and you're providing it with some sort of action to be completed when those are evaluated to true. So I think before I hop into any further, I think let's go ahead and take those questions, Barb, and then I'll get back to the one final process that I wanted to showcase, and then we'll go back to another Q&A.
Okay, that sounds awesome. So we had a couple of questions coming in from Brian and Nikolai. So I think, Brian, your question was, are the values case sensitive? So I'm assuming you were talking about when Suzanne was setting up the workflow rule. And then what's the difference between email alert and outbound message for actions? So why don't we start with those questions first? Brian, can you just confirm that you were asking for the workflow rules there?
Yes, okay, all right.
Yep.
So for the values being sensitive, you don't need to worry about uppercase and lowercase. It will evaluate whether you put everything in uppercase or lowercase. It will be able to evaluate it regardless. So that's in terms of the letters when you're typing in any words to be evaluated. In terms of the difference between email alerts and outbound message, generally email alerts are intended to be internal only. So it's generally similar to having a notification sent where you would want to alert someone on your team that something has happened or something was created. The outbound message is an actual email message being sent to your external user due to the fact that a rule is triggering. So let me know if that helps.
And the second question was from Nikolai. Desk.com has a favorite searches panel on the right when doing a search. Does Service Cloud have this feature? So I'm not sure if which search panel Nikolai is specifically referring to.
I think, Nikolai, you may be referring to in the agent itself at the very top. Is it this where you're referring to the quick search? Or is it the main search? And take your time responding to that. Oh, yes, the top search. Yeah. Yes. So this is the one on the right. Okay. So the quick search at the top here. So the quick search index here in Service Cloud, let me go back to the console. We have a global search. And the global search essentially is both of these search bars combined. So you're able to do a quick search on just a word or a case number, as well as do a deep dive into very specific parts of your cases. So you can do a search at the top here in the global search, and you'll be able to get a hit on both of those scenarios. Was that, did that answer your question, Nikolai?
Okay, so he says no, but I'm not sure. Maybe we can come back to that, Nikolai. Let's save that to the end when we get into Q&A, and that way we can like unmute you and then do more screen sharing, so we can stay on track with actual workflows.
He just actually added, he means showing the top searches. Recent items will show, but not the top searches here. So not within the quick search here. And feel free, if we missed your question, Nikolai, we didn't quite get what you were looking to ask, feel free to elaborate more in the questions panel. I'll get to you when we reach the Q&A session. And as Barb mentioned, we can unmute you. I'm not familiar with how else to get the top searches other than reviewing the recent items, but I'm more than happy to look into that for you and provide you with an answer later on.
Yeah, we can save that to the end, Nikolai. So let's focus on the workflows and automations first, because I know you're already you're jumping ahead, which is awesome. But let's stay on track so we can learn this stuff as well.
Perfect, no problem.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we answered the bulk of the questions. There were a few more, but let's hop back and continue on. Let me revisit real quick here. I believe I only have one more process. So we built out the process for escalating important new cases, which was a workflow. We built the assignment rule versus having the actual setting. So now let's take a closer look at autoresponder rule. So let me go ahead and go back to desk and share my screen again. So an autoresponder rule is similar to when you want to send an auto acknowledgement email in desk.com. So I have a rule here called send auto acknowledgement email, and it looks pretty straightforward. It's exactly what most of these rules would look like in desk, where you're evaluating maybe the status or an email, and if it's true, you're sending out your email acknowledgement template. So this is basically the same as an autoresponder. It's just that it's called autoresponder rather than acknowledgement. So for that, we can use specifically autoresponder rules. So you can search for auto and you'll see case autoresponse rules here on the side. As you can see, the pattern looks very similar. Again, it looks very similar to the assignment rule section and the workflow rule section. So we're going to go ahead and hit new. And we're going to give it a name. I'm going to be lazy again and copy that. And I'm going to go ahead and hit active. And as you guys remember from the previous slides, only one rule can be active at once, and that goes for auto response rules and assignment rules. And the same thing happens as soon as I give it the name. It's just an empty shell. There is nothing within this rule. So I have to click the rule to open it and start building my entries, start building my criteria. And the only criteria I had was as long as status is new, then send the auto acknowledgement. Now in Desk, sometimes you might have had conditions saying if no other acknowledgement has been sent for the last 24 hours. So sometimes you have that extra condition evaluating to make sure that no previous autoresponders has been sent to avoid a loop. However, in Service Cloud, it automatically will by default only send once. So we actually don't need to add in any additional conditions for that. Whenever you add an auto response rule to send an email, it will only be sent once. So we'll create our first rule entry, our first and only rule entry. Again, always set your sort order to 1. And the first evaluation and the only evaluation is the status field. So I will find my case status. I will say equals, and I will select new. So in my case auto response rules, I want to send a template, an autoresponder, if the status evaluates to new when the case is created. So moving on to the next step, because that's all I needed to check as long as status is new in this newly created case. Step 3 is to specify. This is actually a very specific step here, so I'm going to try to take it slow here. When you use case auto response rules in Service Cloud, you actually have to dictate which email address you want to use as the sender. So in order to do that, there is one caveat here, and that is the email to case address. So let me open this up in a separate tab so I can refresh everyone's memory. If you all remember, email to case is equivalent to your mailboxes in desk. So you most likely all have at least one email address in here, and that email to case address is essentially the address that your customers email into to create a case. When you send an autoresponder, you want to send that auto acknowledgement email to your customers. Your email address and your sender cannot be the same as your email to case. It cannot be identical to your email to case. So you have to have a secondary address that is your sender for all the autoresponder rules. I don't know why that is. It is per design and there is no workaround. You may be able to work around it with a lot of code and Apex triggers. There's nothing that I would recommend, and it's not best practice. So the best practice is to use a secondary address. Most of our customers will just add another alias and domain to their existing address for support, and they will name it no reply at support.com or no reply at yourdomain.com. So it's simply an address that will appear as the sending email address. You can, however, dictate the sending name for that email that they will receive when the autoresponder is sent. So for the name, I will say that my sender here will be Little Tea Shop Team. But the address has to be a secondary address. And that secondary address, I've already created it ahead of time. It's very simple to add it. All you need to do is click this link here. It will take you to something called organization-wide email address. Organization-wide email address is that secondary address that you can create to act as your sender for any autoresponders that you're triggering. So if I click this link, it will take me to another page. And it might be a little bit too small here, but I've added an email address here called let me see here. I had initially used another address. So right now, because I added my Yummy Cupcakes of Brooklyn, I actually can't use this. But let's pretend that I didn't have that same address. And I'll put that in as the email. You'll see that I'll get an error. So if I try to use the same address as my email to case, and let me just add a template here. So my autoresponder is called autorespons email to customer. If I save this, it should give me an error saying that I can't use it. And it says this email is the same as your email to case. Please use a different email address. So because I actually forgot that I had added that same address, I would have to create a new address to act as my sender. So I have another address I can quickly throw together. We'll just say support. And I have one called Yummy Bagels of Brooklyn. Not very creative, but. And I'm going to save that. So now I've added a secondary. On the back end here, I do have to, it does send you a verification that you just have to click to verify that this is your address. But for the sake of just demoing this now, I'm just going to copy my new address that I just added. That will be my sender for any autoresponders. I added my autoresponder template and I will click save and that should go through. Okay, it's recognizing that I didn't verify it. But just to prove the point, you need to make sure that you have an organization-wide address that is fully verified and that is different from your email to case address. Once you have that, you'll be able to select it here. So in your auto response rule, you will add your criteria. You will add that sending address that is different from the email to case. Select your template that you want to send to your customer whenever they submit a new case, and then hit save. And that will go through, and that would be your auto acknowledgement being sent to a customer. So similar to this inbound interaction rule triggering an auto acknowledgement template. All right, so apologies for that. I messed up by not verifying that other address, but I'm hoping that everyone gets the point with what you would need to make sure has been done prior to using a case auto response rule. So just to recap quickly, we've created workflow rules, we've created assignment rules, we've created auto response rules, and I showed you how you could get around assignment rules by using the email to case by setting the ownership directly on your email address. So we walked through quite a lot. I do want to make sure that we have enough time for questions, but the final piece that I did want to showcase was Process Builder, which is slightly more complex than workflow rules and all these other rule types that we've talked about today. Process Builder uses a different UI, so it's more visual, and you can accomplish much more with Process Builder. So you can go cross object to evaluate a case, for example, and update something on an opportunity record, or evaluate a case and create an account record, because you can create records with the Process Builder. So if you're looking to get really complex and really detailed, I would recommend Process Builder. I do have one process pre-created. I won't creating it from scratch because it has a lot of parts within it. I don't want it to get too overwhelming in today's session, but I will show into detail what that rule does to showcase how you can make use of Process Builder in a specific scenario. So the rule that I've created here is called create cupcake order. So I'm going to just open this up so you can see the details of this cupcake order process. So let me make this a little bit smaller so you can see all the details. So as you can see, the look and feel of a Process Builder flow is very different from workflow rules and assignment rules and autoresponder rules. It's more visual, where you have these components here that you can click on. There's a start node, there's a stop node, and it clearly shows you when it evaluates false and when it evaluates true. So the way to create the process is, the first part here is very, very similar to workflows, where you have to decide what object you want to trigger this rule against. I want to trigger against the case object. So I selected case because I want to evaluate when a case is created. And also similar to workflows, you can decide, do I want to evaluate this when a record is only created or when it's created and edited? So for the sake of this just testing, I selected the second, but if this was a real case scenario, I would probably only allow this to run when the case is first created. So the purpose of this rule that I created will create a cupcake order whenever a case is submitted with the subject line new cupcake order. So this process will evaluate if anyone submits a case saying new cupcake order, it will evaluate that case. It will create an order record for me. So it will create a completely separate order record for me. And it will make a few updates on that record because this was evaluated. So I'm going to walk you through how that can be done, and we'll run a quick demo so you can see how it actually triggers. The first thing that you do after creating your object is to create your criteria. So I give it a name. So you do have to give it a name, and I've just input a really simple label, case for orders. And I want to execute these conditions in a way that I want to make sure that the conditions are met. So these conditions have to be met in order to allow my rule to run. And here's my condition. I only have one condition. It's very simple. If the subject line of the case has the word new cupcake order, then these have been evaluated to true. So all I'm evaluating is the subject line. And if anyone is interested in learning more about how to set this up, I'm more than happy to throw together a quick document afterwards with the details. But I just want to walk you through one part of a time, and one part at a time, so you can see how you actually build it without necessarily doing it all from scratch, because it's a lot of clicks. I want to make sure you can all see what it will actually accomplish in the end. So my only criteria here is to evaluate if this condition is met, the subject has these words, then it will move to the next step. So if it evaluates to true, and it clearly say here, it says the word true. If that was true and the subject was new cupcake order, then the immediate actions are two. I have two actions to be performed. I want to update the case and I want to create an order. Let's look at the second one here first. I wanted to update the case. And what it will do is nothing needs to be reviewed or evaluated. I just want to update my case with the following actions. Update the description field and add the string order for cupcakes. That's all I wanted to do. So if this triggers to true, the description field on my case will be updated with the wording order for cupcake. So that's one of my actions. My other action is I want to create a record. So this is one of those things that Process Builder can do that workflows cannot. So I will click this action to show you guys what it does. I've given it a name called create order. So orders are a native record type it's a native object in Salesforce called orders that you can use to track orders. So track orders of any type of products that you might be selling. So I will create an order record because this case was created with that subject line. And in my order record that I'm creating, I have to specify a few things. So there are some fields on the order record that are obligatory. They are required and I have to fill them out in order to be able to create one order record. And these are the start date of this order, the status of the order, and which account is associated to the order. So in order to create my order record here, I will set the start date to the actual time where my case was created. So I'll just use the same timestamp for my case being created as the order start date. So nothing fancy there. The status, I will select received order, which is my first status value, just to give it that stage where I can see that this order has not been processed yet, but it has been received. And for account ID, what this means is it needs to tie your order to a specific account. It needs to know who it belongs to. So if I had sent in a case with the subject line new cupcake order, I'm sending it in as Suzanne. My email address is shuhud@salesforce.com. And the associated account that I have on my record in this org is salesforce.com. So I want to tie the account salesforce.com to this order so you can see and track who that order belongs to. So I ordered 10 cupcakes. I want to tie in my order with my account record. So the way to select it would be you go back to, I know this looks lengthy, but it basically reads case.contact.account ID. What that means is go and fetch that case, find the contact on that case. In this case, it was me. I sent in that case, and find the account related to that customer. So in that case, it would be salesforce.com. So I have 3 actions being performed as part of this process. And this will happen if the first is evaluated to true. If subject contains new cupcake order, then those 2 things will happen. An order will be created. I'll update my case. So let's give it a quick test. I know it's a little bit different than workflow rules, but just so you can see how it behaves, we'll go ahead and go back to my console. And I'm just gonna sort this by oldest first. So I will go to my email address real quick. And you might not be able to see this. I will simply create a new email, nothing fancy in it. The only thing I will do is I will say, send this to Yummy Bagels of Brooklyn, because that was my email to case address. So if I want to create a case in my org, then I have to send it into that email to case address. So yummycupcakesofbrooklyn@gmail.com is the email address that I'll send into. My subject, I want to trigger that rule, remember? So my subject has to be new cupcake order. Otherwise, this process will not trigger. So that was what will be evaluated, new cupcake order. So I will put in my subject in my email, new cupcake order, and you'll be able to see my email in a little bit once it comes in. And I'm going to go ahead and send that in. So I've now sent an email address to my email to case address with the subject line, new cupcake order. So I'm going to give it a refresh. Right now I have 9 cases in my all cases view. I'm going to go ahead and refresh to see if that case has been created yet. It has. It updated to 10. I will update to see my newest cases at the top. And here is my new cupcake order email. I had one test from previously, so I apologize if there's any confusion. It's the newest one at the top here that I just created. You have the timestamp here. So here's my case. It has the correct subject line. It was sent in by the contact Suzanne. Here's the case number. I'm going to open that case to see if anything updated on that case. If you remember, one of the things I wanted to happen was I wanted the case to be updated with a description saying order for cupcakes. So I'll go back to the case, and to my delight, it works. The description field has been updated and it says order for cupcakes. Otherwise it would have been blank by default. So this must mean that my rule ran and my other action has also triggered. It should have created an order with these details filled out. So let's take a quick look. Orders are found in the sales console instead of the service console. So I will navigate to my sales console. And I realize this is a more complex process than you all might need, but I want to make sure I showcase what you can do with these tools because you can do so much. And as you can see, I have an all orders list here. And if I sort by date, the one that came in very last here is a new order number 0102. The account is salesforce.com. So this is my new order. This was tied to my account. And if we open it up, it should have the status received order, which it does. So process builders are great in terms of creating other records that are related to your cases. That is something that you cannot do with a workflow rule. So I just wanted to make sure that I walked you guys through how you could possibly make use of processes for that. It is a little bit overly complex, but in general, as I mentioned before, for regular desk rules, you can go a long way with just using workflows. Workflows can perform a whole lot of things, and I would recommend that you revisit that table, that comparison table and chart, if you're unsure of whether or not the workflow rule can accomplish what you're looking to do. And with that, let me go back and share my deck again. Here's my deck. I have added some helpful resources. I've split them up into regular help, just help articles and knowledge content. A couple of articles here that are really useful for how to build a process, how to build a workflow rules, how to automate overall. And I highly recommend the trailhead exercise. It's actually a walkthrough from beginning to end. There's also some video content where you can just watch and learn how to build these rules, as well as assignment rules, autoresponders, and some guidance on how to choose the right tool. And that leads us to the Q&A. Before we start, I want to launch one last poll. I hope I haven't confused anyone with the walkthrough today, but I do want to see how you all feel now if you feel that you're better equipped to tackle these automations yourself, or if you feel that this was way too hard. Give me your feedback and drop your votes. Thank you so much. Just a few more votes and we're at 100. Thank you so much. I think we're missing one more vote. All right, great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, share the results. And it looks like the majority have learned a lot of new things today, but they want to learn or need to learn more. And we have a small batch here of troopers that are feeling that they learned enough today to be able to build out automations on their own, which is great to see. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your feedback on that. So with that, we've reached a Q&A. Thank you so much for sticking around until the very end. We have time for Q&A and even some troubleshooting if anyone has any issues. Before I take your questions, I just want to get everyone's attention on the fact that we will send out a survey after the session. So please take the survey. It takes about a minute to fill out. It gives us great feedback on how we can better improve these sessions. So please make sure to take the survey after the session. And I think with that, let's go ahead and get started, Barb, and let's tackle those questions.
Awesome. So thank you again, Suzanne, for showing us all those great workflows, automations, and process builder. Looks like we don't have a lot of questions right now, but if anybody wants to be unmuted, sometimes it's a little bit easier to ask the question. Just feel free to drop a note into the Q&A panel. I'll go ahead and unmute you. And while we're just waiting for people to muster up the courage, I just want to say this is going to be new to a lot of people. So if you're not feeling 100%, that's totally normal. You're exactly where you should be. But maybe, Suzanne, should we kind of talk about some common rules that we see in desk? I mean, I think some I see are if people have multiple email addresses, let's say they have 2 support email addresses, how would they, what are the options for them to be able to assign and categorize those cases? So let's say if I have in your case, a bagels email and a cupcake support email, and I need to both assign it to somebody, but then for tracking purposes, if I have a custom field that tracks what type of case it is, let's say if I have a cupcake custom field or a drop down that says order type, where my options are, let's say cupcake versus bagel, how could they think through how to set those things up? That includes an assignment, but also a categorization.
That's a good question. So the assignment rules are merely for the assignment. So if you need to only evaluate, you want to evaluate the incoming email, for example, but you don't need to take any action on that other than changing the ownership, then you would just use a regular assignment rule. So you would say, if that case was sent into the bagels address or sent into cupcake address, then assign accordingly to the cupcake or the bagel teams. If you want something to happen after that with the assignment being set, so if it was set to cupcake, then set the category to cupcake type or update a specific pick list or field or value, then you need to work with workflow rules. You'll need to have a workflow rule, evaluate the fact that the ownership is cupcake. If the ownership is cupcake, then go ahead and update XYZ or a specific set of fields. So sometimes you do find yourself working with multiple of these rules together to accomplish what you need. The way to think of it is assignment rules is merely for changing the ownership. Autoresponder rules is merely for triggering that email notification. But with workflow rules and processes, when you need to evaluate something and take multiple actions, then you would use those instead because you want specific things to happen after evaluating those conditions or criteria to true. And I saw a question come in on workflow rules, if they can only create, I think that was Andre in the beginning, if they can only create activities and tasks. I just want to show real quick so that I don't miss out on that question. If we go to my existing workflow rule here and click edit next to the workflow actions, the actions that you can take are listed here. So you can create a task or send an email alert or update any fields on the record or send an outbound message. And this select existing action, you can disregard this. This just means that if you've already used one of these actions before, you can reuse it again. So it's mainly these 4 types of actions that you can perform on workflow rules. So I hope your questions, Andre. I think it came in a little early, but we missed it.
Yeah, so Andre, on that one, like in my example, it's if I want to categorize it, if it's a cupcake order or a bagel order, that's where I could potentially do a new field update. So if I have a pick list that has, like what the case is concerning, I can actually create that workflow rule in conjunction with how Suzanne was showing the case assignment rule. So you could do it here. You could also do it using Process Builder. So you have a little bit of flexibility in where you can build those rules out.
Perfect. And Brian had a similar use case, but with, I think, outbound. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Andre. Brian had a question about if you have something like similar to that workflow that I built in the beginning for escalations of some sort. You wanted to evaluate high priority cases. And you're saying that if the word urgent is in the subject line, you want to send that email to a third party user. In this case, it was PagerDuty. You can do that using an outbound message in a workflow rules. You can also use Process Builder for that. The problem with using workflow rule for something like that, so in your example, Brian, you wanted to send that outbound message as an alert to PagerDuty, which makes sense. You would want to alert your team that something high priority or VIP came in. The problem with that is, let me go back to the message. With alerts, email alerts within workflow rules, it needs to know the email address beforehand of where you're looking to send the message. So if I send that email alert and I have a specific PagerDuty template, I'll give it a name and a unique name. Who is the recipient of that email to PagerDuty? The problem that you will face if you use a workflow rule is that that recipient is most likely not existing in any of these options. You can send it to the Service Cloud user, the internal user to notify. You can send it to the owner, being that case owner of the actual case. It can be, let me see if I can find the role, the related user here. See if I have any of these available to showcase. I have a workaround here. I'm glad you asked that question, Brian, but what I'm trying to get to is the recipient has to be specified beforehand if you want to send an email alert from a workflow rule. Most likely you have a very long, unique email address for PagerDuty that you would want to send that email template to. So one of the things that you can do is you can create a case email field that has a fixed address in it. And that fixed address would be your PagerDuty address, and you would use that as your recipient. So that's sort of a hack to get around it. Otherwise, you can definitely use Process Builder for this. But if you must use our workflow rules, you just need to keep in mind that you will need to create a field of some sort on the case that holds that specific PagerDuty address. So it's already there by default. So it will look something like this. And this is a very unique scenario, so most likely not something that a lot of people would run into, but it will look something like this. So I have a fixed address where it's just a regular email type field. And within this field, I can give it a specific default value. So that default value can hold your email address. Let me know if that makes sense, Brian.
And Suzanne, would it be fair to say, like, for things like notifications, it's easier just to use Process Builder since you can kind of hard code that into the flow?
Yeah.
Or is that a little bit easier? Yeah.
Yeah. Some people refrain from using Process Builder because they feel that it's much more complex, but it's actually really robust. And once you get of it and maybe create one or two test processes, you'll see that for sending emails specifically that are outbound, Process Builder is going to be easier on the long run. And I saw you asked there, Brian, the true regarding the long unique. Yeah, exactly. It's a very, PagerDuty has a very long unique address. And most likely this hack is not going to be, the best solution moving forward. So I would recommend just using Process Builder for that. So give that a try and let us know how that goes.
Awesome. That's a great explanation. The other places I've seen people use Process Builder for notifications outside of Salesforce is to, for example, post Slack messages. So there's, I think somebody was asking about it a few office hours ago. I don't know if it was actually, maybe it was Antoine or Brian. Perhaps you guys were asking me that, but oh, it was. Okay, great. Yeah. So that's exactly where you would use Process Builder to post to things like Slack or forward to any system emails that you guys may have.
Yeah, I think what you're saying here, Brian, Brian is saying here that he did his research and he's found that there is no direct integration from PagerDuty to Service Cloud. That might be the case. I'm not entirely sure myself. I haven't looked into PagerDuty before and connected it to Service Cloud, but you most definitely will find a Slack integration like Barb mentioned. So that could be your workaround where you would connect Slack instead and have those notifications for escalated cases pop up directly through Slack and not necessarily via PagerDuty. So that could be an easier way to get about it.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go down the list to see if anybody else has questions. Andre, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Are there any other questions that you have kind of just thinking through what you're trying to build out?
No, not right now. The one thing that I want to put in place at some point is a rule that will say essentially if an agent is working on an open case for customer X and a new case comes in for customer X, I want to assign that case to the same agent that's already working on an open case for that customer. Does that make sense?
Yes, I actually think you sent that question as a follow-up from the office hours from Friday. I actually haven't been able to dig into that yet.
Okay.
And I don't know, Suzanne, is that something maybe we can follow up afterwards? Because I don't know how to do that automatically through Process Builder.
Yeah, sure. We can certainly follow up and get back to you for sure.
Yeah. Anything else that you're trying to automate in the more immediate term, Andre?
No, I mean, this was helpful because I need to think about like setting up an email template for the auto response. So that was good to know. I didn't know that you couldn't have the response go to the same email address. So that was good to know. So I think that gets us to a good spot in terms of the basics that we need right now.
Okay. And if you're also using the Salesforce, the Service Cloud trial org that our team created, the default template for the auto response is already in there. It comes with the trial org. You may want to go into the templates area and edit it for any additional information or logos or customizations you want to do, but it does actually come with the trial org as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Suzanne, actually, would you be able to show how Andre can find that in case he hasn't looked for it yet? The classic email templates where we have the auto response template in the trial org.
So you're just going to search for template, classic email template. Yeah.
Okay.
Under it will automatically default to a folder called service templates where you'll see all these notifications and templates we've created for you by default. So you'll find them in the trial and you can make use of those in your rules.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. All right, Andre, thanks for coming. I'll just put you back on mute. Hey, Nikolai, I know you're just getting started. Any questions specifically for automations or any of the rules that you've seen? Oh, okay.
Antoine?
Okay. Okay, I think, let me go ahead. Okay, Nikolai says no. Okay, all right. Antoine, sorry, looks like you have a question here. Antoine, go ahead, I'll unmute you.
Yes, I was trying to see the way to select, I guess, the object to, or a status. So like if we wanted to have a case that comes in and we don't want it to actually show up or be assigned to an owner, but we would like for it to just automatically resolve.
Yeah, you would use workflow role for that. It would just be easier to auto-resolve it that way, and it will trigger upon the case being created.
Okay. And I was trying to see which object that would be with that, because I was looking for case status. When I click the new field update, will it be field update or um,
Yeah,
send action?
it would be the field update. So within the action section, you would select the new field update, and under that new field update section, you'll be able to select your field that you want to update for this, and you would change if it was status or any other field that you wanted to tap into in the role.
Okay, I see service contract, but I don't see status listed there, so that's why I asked. I was trying to follow your example, but I didn't see that.
Did you use
Um,
did you use a case as your object when you created in the first place? So does it say case as your object?
yes,
Okay, so maybe are you using an existing org by any chance, or is this a trial account?
it's a trial account.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's connect with you afterwards then, because I know we're at time. I'll send you after the session, and maybe we can do a quick, if you can send me like a screenshot of what it looks like on your end, and I'll help you troubleshoot that and figure out why it's not appearing for you.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, you're welcome. I think with that, Barb, we're pretty much at the end of our session. Again, I would like to really thank everyone for joining, and thank you, Barb, for helping me with the questions. Please take the survey after the session and let us know if you have any specific feedback. We have a masterclass coming up next week for data migration, so feel free to register for that and sign up if you would like to learn more on that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.